considering their history. A third person chimed in, noting that the 7 arrested individuals were the second generation of native families, and that the deputy consul would likely just embarrass them before releasing them. However, another individual added that the charges against the 7 suggested that they may be executed. This sparked a conversation about whether the children of native families would really be put to death. One person claimed that the new deputy consul had a reputation for being ruthless, citing the fact that he had burned a 10 billion gold with one stake. Despite this, another person thought that executing the 7 individuals would put the deputy consul in a difficult situation. The citizens of Underdog City had believed that the arrest of the 7 notorious gang leaders was just a political power play between the new politician and the native authorities. They had predicted that once the local powerhouses bent their wills, the situation would be over and the imprisoned gang members would be released unscathed. As expected, the Mont Blanc clan, Pure clan, Luovi clan, Channel clan, Ferragamu clan, Hermes clan, and the Pradar clan delivered an apology to the new deputy consul. But things didn't go as predicted. The 7 heads of the gang leaders were hung in the middle of the center square, preserved with salt and displaying expressions of agony as if they had experienced excruciating pain until their last breaths. The public notice above the heads explained the punishments they received prior to their executions in detail. The Baskerville family autonomy constitution was known for its strict laws and harsh punishments. The first clause was about the banning of illegal brothels. The penalty for this offense was a tattoo on the face of the criminal, with the symbol for sex being tattooed all over the face. The punishment was executed according to the governing law above. The second clause was about the banning of illegal gambling, and the penalty for this offense was wrist amputation. The punishment was carried out according to the law, with both wrists being amputated, taking into account the number of times the law was disobeyed. The criminal's wrists were amputated 72 times at regular intervals. The third clause was about the banning of illegal private loans, and the penalty for this offense was the removal of eyes. However, in consideration of the pleas of those who had been affected by these criminals, the punishment was not executed. The fourth and final clause was about the banning of illegal lobbying, and the penalty for this offense was exile. Since the criminals were already dead, their bodies, excluding their heads, were thrown outside the castle walls. The crowd was in shock as they read the notice and saw the scene in front of them. Vikir in his office explained that there was no reason to be surprised as the laws were already in place. However, this was the first time that the infamous native families would be serving the sentences. He believed that this would bring forth change and that once the destruction of either parties began, Underdog City would go through a bloodbath. Vikir turned to Chihuahua and warned him to brace himself, as he would join him in the next strategy. Chihuahua was surprised and clearly taken aback by Vikir's words. The scene changes and Chihuahua was standing in the same pose with a mask on his face. Chihuahua turned back and whispered to the occupant inside the cage, who was none other than the deputy consul, asking if this was really the right strategy. Vikir simply asked Chihuahua if he didn't trust him. As Chihuahua stood there, the place began to fill up with people. They all wore masks to conceal their identities, and slaves were also being transported, their hands bound in iron chains. Amidst the chaos, Chihuahua's thoughts turned to Vikir, who sat quietly in one of the slave cages. Chihuahua wondered if deputy consul being sold as a slave was a good strategy. Underdog City, located in the outskirts, was known for its unlawful events, and one such event was the slave auction. In the middle of nowhere, a huge tent was set up, and luxurious carriages started to gather around it. The products being sold were kidnapped barbarians, nobles, and commoners, all waiting to be auctioned off to the highest bidder. The Baskerville family was unaware of this unlawful event. The auctioneer, standing in front of the crowd, greeted them and welcomed them to the circus. The auctioneer noticed the arrival of Chihuahua's group. He greeted them with a smile, recognizing their signature trait as an exclusive feature of the Mont Blanc clan. He looked at their identification paper and saw that they were there as sellers. He expressed his concern that the Mont Blanc clan did not like the slaves they had purchased in the last auction, as they were precious customers who always purchased a large number of slaves. Chihuahua replied that they were satisfied with the quality of the slaves sold here. The auctioneer's attention was drawn to Vikir, who was in a cage with black hair and red eyes, a rare product. He promised to take responsibility and sell it at a good price. Chihuahua agreed and left it to him. The auctioneer bid farewell to Chihuahua Mont Blanc, hoping that he would enjoy his time at the circus. Inside the tent, the auctioneer stood on the stage as the crowd murmured amongst themselves. Some discussed the trend of mysterious-looking slaves, while others preferred pretty and good-looking slaves. Some were attracted to the tragic backstories of fallen nobles or kidnapped nobles, but everyone agreed that they hoped for many good products that day. The auctioneer then introduced the first item, a secret embezzlement by the Baskerville family's knights. It was an rank monster known as the Merciel, a cow species found in the depths of hell and said to inhabit another world. It was said to possess 19 hearts and keep attacking until all of them stopped. The auctioneer listed its uses, from leather to meat, bones, and intestines, stating that nothing goes to waste. The bidding started at 100 million gold, and bidders quickly raised the price to 140 million, then 200 million. And finally 250 million gold. The auctioneer announced that they had hit 250 million gold and asked if anyone else wanted to bid. When no one else spoke up, he slammed the hammer and declared the item sold. The auction continued with more items, each with their own unique qualities and uses. The crowd eagerly bid on each product, hoping to score a valuable purchase. And so, the slave auction at the circus continued, a dark and unlawful event that remained hidden from the eyes of the law. As the bidding for various products continued, the auctioneer urged the bidders to move on to the next product. However, a worker whispered something in his ear, and the auctioneer appeared surprised. He announced to the crowd that a rare item had arrived, picked up by the slave businessmen from a deep jungle, from a warrior tribe in the La Rouge-et-Lenoir Mountains jungles, the barbarian of Balak. A girl who appeared fierce was brought onto the stage, and the auctioneer encouraged the bidders to try and tame a wild slave, as it would be a chance to put their training techniques to the test. However, despite the auctioneer's efforts to start the bidding at 5 million, nobody placed a bid. After some time, the auctioneer lowered the initial bidding price to 3 million, but still nobody placed a bid. Eventually, the auctioneer was forced to give up and offered the girl for just 1 million gold, but still nobody wanted to buy her. The crowd began to lose interest, and the auctioneer realized that the girl was not going to sell. He asked the guard to take her away and bring out the guaranteed products instead. Suddenly the girl tried to break free, but the guard knocked her unconscious with a punch to the stomach and took her backstage. The auctioneer then apologized for the minor incident and promised to bring out the best product of the day as compensation for the unsatisfactory auction. The best product of the day was none other than Vikir. The auctioneer introduced Vikir, describing him as a purebred boy with black hair and red eyes who only required minimal restraints. A lady in the crowd was clearly impressed by Vikir's beauty and physique and immediately placed a bid of 600 million. The auctioneer was surprised and amused by her eagerness to bid without even announcing the starting price. Another bidder, a man, placed a bid of 800 million, which angered the lady who questioned why a male would want to take Vikir. The man replied that it was none of her business and that he wanted to use Vikir as a gladiator. Suddenly, another bidder placed a bid of 900 million, and then a bidder with the number Placate 99 raised the bid to an astonishing 6 billion. The auctioneer was surprised and asked if anyone else wanted to bid. The crowd looked towards the bidder, a masked man who was recognized by some as Baron Gambino from the granary. The people commented on his deep pockets and recent increase in wealth due to taking over underground funds. The Baron had just spent 6 billion to buy a slave, and his attendant expressed concern that he was spending too much. However, the Baron was confident that he could resell the slave for a higher price in the capital and still make a profit. The attendant raised another issue, telling that he would only profit if the slave's body remained unscathed. This angered the Baron, who lashed out at her and reminded her that he had taken her in when she had nowhere to go and now she was arrogantly biting the hand that fed her. The auctioneer announced that customer 99 was the winning bidder for the slave, Vikir. As Vikir was brought before Baron Gambino, the Baron examined him closely and thought to himself that Vikir looked even better up close. Addressing Vikir, Baron Gambino declared that he now belonged to him and assured him that he was not a bad person, urging him not to be nervous. However, his next words and perverted expression left Vikir uncomfortable as the Baron spoke of the many ways he could play with him and how he was already looking forward to it. Suddenly, Vikir placed his hands in front of the Baron, who was puzzled and asked if he wanted him to undo his handcuffs. But before the Baron could react, Vikir broke the handcuffs with ease, stunning both the Baron and his attendant. Without hesitation, Vikir kicked the Baron, sending him flying down to the ground. Vikir then grabbed the Baron's back with his hand and proposed a game, which he named Spear and Shield. As he squeezed the Baron's back, Vikir explained that he would be the spear, and if the Baron, as the shield, could endure his attack, he would win. The Baron shouted in pain and called out to Cindy for help, but before she could move, the Baron had already lost consciousness. Vikir looked at the Baron and declared that he had fainted, meaning that he had won the game. He then took off the fake hair he was wearing, revealing his true identity as Vikir van Baskerville. Cindy Windy, the Baron's attendant, instantly recognized him and exclaimed his name. However, Vikir ignored her and instead turned to the Baron, asking if he was dead. The crowd was shocked to see Vikir there and started murmuring amongst themselves, wondering if Vikir was here then who was the underdog city's new deputy consul. Someone even questioned why a Baskerville hound was present here. Meanwhile, Chihuahua, who was among the crowd, thought to himself how the deputy consul had turned the situation into something big. Vikir then looked at the crowd and remarked that the circus was a suitable name for this place. His eyes and smile turned menacing as he warned everyone not to think they could leave in one piece. Vikir stood in the middle of the auction room, unarmed and surrounded by guards. The atmosphere was tense as everyone watched in worry, unsure of what would happen next. The auctioneer was clearly unhappy with the situation and shouted at the guards to just kill Vikir, not caring about his status as the deputy consul. The guards started attacking Vikir. However, before they could reach him, Beelzebub emerged from Vikir's hands and his sword reached them first and sliced through them with ease. The auctioneer was terrified by the red and horrific aura emanating from Vikir and realized that Vikir was no ordinary person. As one of the guards prepared to swing a metal ball attached to a chain towards Vikir, he quickly ran towards him and sliced through both the ball and the guard effortlessly. The auctioneer's thoughts were racing as he tried to make sense of what was happening. He couldn't believe that Vikir was a graduator, that too at such a young age. Graduators were the ultimate weapons that represented a nation's strength. He knew that they didn't stand a chance at winning if Vikir was their opponent. Suddenly, Chihuahua spoke up, revealing that he had never expected the deputy consul's swordsmanship skills to be so irregular. However, he was soon shocked by something he saw. As Vikir continued to fight, he suddenly heard a laugh coming from behind him. He turned around to see the auctioneer holding a knife to Chihuahua's throat. The auctioneer demanded that Vikir drop his weapon and surrender, threatening to kill Chihuahua if he didn't comply. Vikir remained calm and stood his ground, causing the auctioneer to become even more agitated. Chihuahua, whose throat was still being held by the knife, reassured Vikir that he was alright and urged him to look after himself. The auctioneer was angry at Chihuahua's words and tried to stop him from talking. But Chihuahua remained steadfast in his loyalty to his superior. Vikir laughed at Chihuahua's words, impressed by his dedication, and assured him that he had received a trump card from the patriarch Hugo. Vikir revealed a flute attached to his leg, causing the auctioneer to become confused and ask what he was planning to do with it. Chihuahua also saw the whistle and thought about its significance. Vikir, with the flute in his hand, stepped forward in front of the crowd. Without any warning, he put the flute in his mouth and blew it with all his might. The sound was so loud that it echoed throughout the entire room. The people in the crowd covered their ears with their hands and shouted in pain, trying to protect themselves from the deafening noise. When Vikir finished playing the flute, everyone looked at him in silence, trying to understand what had just happened. The auctioneer, who was in charge of the event, realized that everything was fine. He seemed to be relieved that nothing had happened and laughed it off as a scare tactic and said that even a graduator can't do anything here. However, the situation took a deadly turn as the auctioneer's throat was pierced by a sword from behind. And before the auctioneer could even realize what was happening, his head was sliced off. The killer stood there wearing a hood. As the hooded figure stood beside Chihuahua, Chihuahua watched the dead auctioneer in shock. One of the guards present tried to attack the hooded figure, asking who he was. But the hooded figure effortlessly flicked his sword and the attack was covered in a dense red aura, which shredded the guard into pieces. As the other guards watched in horror, Vikir had a smirk on his face, seemingly pleased with the chaos unfolding around him. Suddenly, more people wearing hoods appeared at the location, and there were a lot of them. Each of them emitted a powerful aura, and the cold look in their eyes could pierce someone's soul. One of the guards tried to guess who they were, but he could barely get the words out of his mouth due to fear. Another guard prayed, hoping that they weren't who he thought they were. Cindy Windy, who was present there, recognized the teeth symbol on their chests, and identified them as the Empire's most brutal Knight Order, known as the Annihilation Experts. All 100 knights from the order were graduators, and they were the Baskerville clan's Pitbull Knight Order. Just then, one of the Pitbull Knights appeared behind Cindy, ready to draw his sword and cut her down. She was filled with fear, thinking that she couldn't die in a place like this. But suddenly, Vikir appeared in front of her and stopped the knight, commanding him to leave her alive. The knight backed off and knelt down, showing respect to Vikir. Vikir ordered the knight to rip the rest of them to shreds and kill them, but he told the knight not to kill those who were lying down obediently. However, if they moved even a little, he ordered the knight to kill them relentlessly. The knight disappeared, saying that he heard and obeyed. Vikir was relieved that he was able to take the pit bulls without any trouble, knowing that Hugo was very sensitive about military power. The chance to order the pit bull order was the reward that Vikir had asked for before leaving for Underdog City. The cries of people being cut down by the pit bull order could be heard throughout the area. One guy, lying on the ground in fear, thought to himself that he should just stay down and run away when things quietened down. However, a pitbull knight suddenly appeared in front of him, causing him to squeal in terror. He begged the knight, saying that he would obediently wear the cuffs. The pitbull knight responded by saying that they don't carry things like cuffs around. The guy was confused and asked what would happen to him then. Suddenly, the pitbull knight sliced off his legs, causing him to scream in pain. The knight coldly stated that those who were going to be executed didn't need their legs. A man with a cigar in his mouth stood beside Vikir. He was the commander of the Pitbull Knights, Vikir van Baskerville. He asked Vikir how he felt about using the Pitbull Knights and if he was satisfied with their performance. Vikir replied that he was satisfied, and Vikir offered to help him with anything else he needed. Vikir took a good look at Vikir and thought to himself that he understood why brother Hugo was so interested in him. He was already fierce and cruel at the young age of 15. Vikir placed his hand on Vikir's head and invited him to come to the Pitbull Knights later, promising to raise him properly. Vikir hesitated and said he would think about it. As he started to leave, he mentioned an urgent matter that he needed to attend to. Vikir watched Vikir leave and couldn't help but feel ignored. He thought to himself that he wanted Vikir even more now. As Vikir left, he thought to himself that Vikir was burdensome. Vikir stepped into the dimly lit storeroom, his eyes scanning and searching for something as he muttered to himself. He was sure that what he was looking for was around here. As he looked around, his gaze fell upon a large safe in the corner of the room. He wondered if this was the safe where the noble's payment was stored. He thought about giving all this money to City Hall for taxation, but quickly pushed those thoughts aside, realizing that they weren't important at the moment. Turning away from the safe, he noticed a cage nearby that was covered with a cloth. His expression turned to one of determination as he muttered to himself that the reason he came to the storeroom wasn't for money but something else. With a sense of purpose, Vikir walked over to the cage and removed the cloth covering it, revealing a battered and bruised girl lying inside crying out in pain, as tears silently streamed down her cheeks. Vikir gazed at the girl who lay in the cage, tears streaming down her face. From the bruises and injury marks on her body, it was apparent that she had been tormented before being brought here. With a disapproving click of his tongue, Vikir took out a potion from his pack and said that the girl was fortunate enough to receive it. It was a potion he had obtained from the Night Order, which they had given him out of the goodness of his heart. Vikir then poured the potion into the barbarian girl's mouth, and its effects could be seen immediately as the bruises and injury marks on her body began to heal visibly, right before his eyes. Suddenly, the girl's eyes fluttered open, but she recoiled in fear when she saw Vikir standing before her. Perplexed, Vikir asked why she was so surprised, but the girl just looked at him questioningly. Without a word, Vikir rose to his feet and unlocked the cage door. In the barbarian language, he ordered the girl to go. The girl appeared to understand what Vikir was trying to convey, but still looked at him with confusion. Vikir thought about how he had learned some of the basics of the barbarian language during his fights against them before his regression. Pointing towards the exit, Vikir spoke again in the barbarian language, this time instructing the girl to run away. In response, the girl spoke something in her native tongue, but Vikir was unable to comprehend it. He admitted to the girl that he wasn't very fluent in the barbarian language. Just before departing, the barbarian girl looked back and said something to Vikir in her native language, and even though he couldn't understand her words, Vikir concluded that she was probably thanking him. Vikir then took out another cloth, revealing the reason he had come to the storage area. As Vikir stood with the cloth in his hand, he looked at what he had been searching for, Merciel's corpse. He approached the corpse and examined it closely, relieved to find that it was still intact. Suddenly, Vikir's hand began to emit a red aura, and Beelzebub emerged from it. With a grin on his face, Vikir told Beelzebub that it had been a while since Beelzebub had feasted on an Arank monster, but it would be allowed to eat it soon. He reminded Beelzebub that the Pitbull order was due to arrive shortly, and therefore it needed to finish its meal quickly. In response, Beelzebub made a pleased noise, expressing gratitude to Vikir for this incredible feast. The news of the new deputy consul's actions against the criminal organization spread like wildfire. As the sun rose, rumors circulated that the nobles and others involved in the illegal slave auction were now prisoners in the Underdog City prison with their limbs torn off. The den of the large demon in Underdog City, burning suspension, burned down and vanished completely. The heads of the club's VIPs were put on display, creating more awareness of criminal activities. The 7 original clans, who lost their children, sent written protests to the administrative office, but Vikir's reply was firm. He stated that the death penalty was the only punishment for those involved in the imperial family's most forbidden act of illegal slave trading. Bank drafts, ledger books, and information about the criminals' cash transactions were all taken into custody. The Baskerville clan was currently investigating the incident, and was going to report its findings to the imperial family. After hearing that, the written protests from the 7 families eventually came to a halt. The patriarchs of each of the 7 families personally came to the administrative office, marking an unprecedented situation where they had to plead with their enemy who had killed their sons. Vikir's response was simple. The black ledgers that were inside Burning Suspension had already been investigated. In accordance with the Baskerville self-governing dominion, the 7 families' assets would be confiscated, and, on the charge of treason, 3 generations would be destroyed. Due to the new deputy consul being appointed, the floors of the execution ground were filled with the dirty blood of the city's corrupt vermin. As a result of this, public officials and related subcontractors needed manpower, which led to a decrease in unemployment rates in the underdog city. The collapse of the illegal underground auction led to a surge in tax revenue, and the welfare of the underdog city was restored. Vikir's stock price increased daily because of the citizens of the underdog city. Chihuahua stood holding a coffee cup as he approached Vikir, the consul, and said that he had brought coffee. Vikir responded by telling Chihuahua that he didn't need to bring him coffee since he was the office manager. However, Chihuahua insisted that it was his way of thanking Vikir for saving him from a potential stabbing by the clown during the slave auctions. Vikir smiled and joked that Chihuahua was being stingy by giving him coffee in exchange for saving his life. Chihuahua responded by explaining that he had put 2 spoons of sugar, creamer, and a little bit of water in the coffee. Chihuahua then changed the topic and asked about Vikir's transcribing training. Vikir handed over a paper sheet and asked Chihuahua to take a look at it for him. Chihuahua was surprised at how good Vikir's writing was despite not having learned how to write for very long. Vikir humbly stated that he still had a lot to learn and praised Chihuahua's abilities as the office manager. Chihuahua thought to himself that Vikir was an amazing person, having the ability to create new laws and comprehend knowledge of the law. He believed that if the deputy consul stayed in the city, Underdog City would be able to develop even more. In the middle of the night, the sky was filled with clouds, and some moonlight rays escaped and fell into a prison cell. Vikir was standing in the cell, facing a prisoner who was none other than Cindy Windy, Baron Gambino's attendant whom Vikir had saved previously in the slave auctions. Cindy Windy had handcuffs on her hands and a blindfold covering her eyes. Vikir apologized for not being able to visit her sooner, and explained that he had been busy with other matters. He asked her a question to confirm that her name was Cindy Windy Senrose, but she didn't answer his question and instead asked why he had let her live. Vikir removed the blindfold covering her eyes and replied that reason he had saved her was that he had some questions he wanted to ask her. Cindy Windy looked at him with disdain and questioned if that was the only reason he kept her alive. Vikir didn't answer the question and turned around and said that after investigating, he had discovered that the reason Baron Gambino, who was just an ordinary homosexual, was able to increase his power so quickly, and the reason was due to Cindy Windy's abilities to earn money. He added that if she had been able to grow her talent in a place other than an underworld family, she would have been able to become a great merchant or banker. Vikir then placed a chair in front of Cindy and sat down on it. He made her an offer, promising to let her go if she answered his questions but warning of consequences if she refused. Cindy bit her lips in anger but eventually agreed to answer if she could. Vikir looked at Cindy and asked about his performance as a law enforcer. Cindy responded with a mocking smile, saying that a reputable magistrate has graced the city with his presence. Vikir was not satisfied with her response and expressed his concern that he cannot uphold his promise if she doesn't take him seriously. Cindy sighed in annoyance and finally gave in, admitting that she thinks he was doing well. Vikir gazed at Cindy with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. Suddenly, his expression changed and a grin spread across his face. He rose from his chair and strode towards Cindy, grabbing her chin and bringing his face closer to hers. With a deep voice, he asked her why she thought he was doing well as a law enforcer. Cindy's face was covered in cold sweat as she looked at Vikir's red eyes. Vikir released her chin and walked towards a nearby chair. He turned to Cindy and asked her to speak her mind. Cindy gritted her teeth in anger and began to explain her perspective. She reminded Vikir that, as a consul, the concept of virtue had always been considered one of the most important factors. While Vikir's laws might take care of street criminals and raise his own dignity, they would ultimately result in the deaths and suffering of many citizens. In the long term, such laws would only fuel hatred and rage among the people. Cindy then looked directly at Vikir and warned him that the Baskervilles would not welcome him once he gained more power than the clan leader in Underdog City. Vikir concluded from Cindy's explanation that if he continued down this path, he would be hated by the people and become a target of the Baskervilles. He asked for Cindy's advice on what he should do next. Cindy replied that Vikir should return all his authority to the Baskerville clan, along with the glory of the events that happened here. She suggested that he give them to the clan leader. In order to avoid further attention, she advised him to go to either the La Rouge et La Noire mountain or the academy in the center of the empire. These were places where people of his age and status were common, allowing him to hide his powers and wash his identity. Cindy assured Vikir that when the time comes, the Baskerville clan leader would be the one who suffers in his stead. After hearing Cindy's advice, Vikir remained silent for a few moments. Suddenly, Cindy felt a surge of bloodlust, and she shuddered at the feeling. Vikir's voice broke the silence as he expressed his understanding of Cindy's suggestion, remarking that it was like asking a hunting dog to bite off its own owner's neck. He looked at Cindy with a great amount of bloodlust and killing intent, waiting for her response. However, Cindy did not show any fear. Instead, she looked at Vikir with a calm gaze and replied that it was the only way for him to avoid the Baskervilles' hatred. Vikir smiled faintly and said he would keep her advice in mind. He added that Cindy's ideas were almost identical to his. Then, Vikir surprised Cindy by opening her handcuffs and freeing her. Cindy asked him if he was really letting her go, to which Vikir replied that he always kept his promises. Cindy walked past Vikir and expressed her hope that he would never come to regret what had happened today. However, before she could leave, Vikir asked her if she knew of a clan called the Mesimaginero. Vikir continued to narrate a story about the Mesimaginero clan. He explained that there were more than just the well-known 7 clans among the founding clans of the Underdog City. The Mesimaginero clan was a prosperous merchant clan and was the 8th clan. However, their prosperity came to an end due to an unfortunate event. During a birthday celebration, the youngest son of the Mesimaginero clan showed off his newly learned sword skills, and the people of Baskerville couldn't believe what they saw. The sword technique that the young child had learned was none other than the secret Baskerville sword techniques, which only members of the family knew. The news soon reached the leader of the Baskerville clan, and they believed that top-secret military information had been leaked. The Baskerville clan released the hunting dogs, causing the Mesimaginero clan to go extinct. However, there was someone behind the scenes pulling the strings. The young demons of the 7 clans had stolen the sword techniques from the Baskerville clan and allowed the young child of the Mesimaginero clan to learn them. Cindy looked at Vikir and forced a smile, asking what the story of the 8th clan had to do with her. Vikir didn't answer her question and went on to reveal that there was actually a survivor from the Mesimaginero clan massacre. The girl was only 1 year old when she was taken from the devastation and subjected to cruel and unusual torture simply because she was beautiful. The acts they committed were too foul for even Vikir to talk about. Cindy couldn't bear it and started to walk away with an angry expression, telling Vikir she didn't want to hear his story anymore. But Vikir continued, saying that there was more to the story. A new deputy consul was appointed to the city and he managed to bring the old problems to light, punishing the 7 idiots who committed the heinous crime. They were thoroughly tortured and made to admit their crimes before they met their end. In their last moments, they expressed remorse for their actions, and their last words were, "I'm sorry for committing such a heinous crime." Cindy turned back and tears streamed down her face. She asked Vikir who the 7 young masters were apologizing. Vikir looked at her calmly and replied that they should apologize to the young girl who had used the fake name Cindy Wendy Senrose and was the sole survivor of the Mesimaginero clan. With tears still flowing, Cindy asked Vikir how she was supposed to believe him, given that he had taken them and tortured them. She questioned how she could trust that they had truly apologized. Vikir picked up a fire torch and replied that the easiest way for her to believe him would be to see it with her own eyes. Vikir took Cindy to the prison cell where the 7 young masters were held before their deaths, and urged her to take a look. Cindy's eyes widened with surprise as she saw that the prisoners had written an apology with their own blood on the floor. The apologies read, "We were the ones that drove the Mesimaginero clan to devastation. Forgive us for our crimes." They asked for forgiveness and were scared beyond imagination, pleading to be spared. Cindy's tears continued to flow as she looked at the apologies. She suddenly felt nauseous and started vomiting after seeing the gruesome scene. Vikir walked towards her and said that even though they had all died painful deaths, the Mesimaginero clan's vengeance was not yet over. He informed her that there was still one more clan to deal with. Vikir then urged Cindy to despise the Baskervilles and to remember that she had more than enough right to do so, being a member of the Mesimaginero clan. Cindy wiped her mouth and tears continued to stream down her face. She asked Vikir why he was helping her, given that he was a part of the Baskerville clan. Vikir looked at her with a smirk and replied that she was asking the wrong question. As Cindy got up and started to walk away, she stated that she understood what he was trying to say. She then turned back and addressed Vikir by his full name, Vikir van Baskerville, and promised to repay this debt. As she walked away, she promised that no matter what he did with the rest of his life, she will ensure that he would never have to worry about money again. Vikir watched her departing figure, and after some time, he said that he would remember her promise. Chihuahua rushed to Deputy Consul Vikir's personal room, eager to inform him that it was time to get ready for work. However, as soon as he opened the door, his words got stuck in his mouth as he saw Vikir sleeping peacefully amidst blood-stained sheets and dead bodies scattered around the room. Vikir woke up and rubbed his eyes, greeting Chihuahua with a pleasant good morning. Chihuahua couldn't help but ask about the corpses lying around the room, to which Vikir casually replied that he wasn't sure and that it seemed like he had killed them in his sleep. Chihuahua was taken aback and asked if Vikir was serious, to which Vikir simply laughed and told him that it was just a joke. As they walked down the hallway, Chihuahua asked Vikir about his childhood experiences. Vikir responded by asking if Chihuahua didn't find his earlier joke funny. Chihuahua clarified that it wasn't about the joke being funny or not. Vikir then made a thoughtful expression and thought aloud about the recent inconveniences he had faced. He remembered being hit by 2 poison arrows, drinking poison drinks 4 times, facing acid, snipers, arson, getting run over by a cart, and various other dangerous situations. Scratching his ear, Vikir questioned if he had gathered someone's attention. Chihuahua responded by saying that he thought Vikir had gone insane. Vikir contemplated the skills stored in Beelzebub, the sword summoned from his arm. He couldn't help but be impressed with the effectiveness of the Hellish Buffalo's Tough Life skill, which he had obtained during the last illegal auction. The skill had a risk rating of A, but it had proven to be even more effective than he had initially thought. All 3 of Beelzebub's slots were filled with skills: Burn Injury Cerberus, Hemorrhage Hellhound, and Tough Life Hellish Buffalo. With the enhancements of the River Styx and Tough Life enhancing his body, even Graduator Class Assassin has been unable to pierce his skin. Despite his satisfaction with the power of his skills, the continued attempts on his life had started to become bothersome. Vikir knew he needed to investigate and put an end to the assassinations. Chihuahua smiled in agreement with his decision. Suddenly, Vikir and Chihuahua noticed a carriage in front of them. They both recognized the flag on the carriage as Baskerville's and expressed surprise that the Baskervilles had arrived there. Vikir looked serious and guessed that they had likely been sent by the main family. As the carriage door opened, the guests began to walk down from it. Chihuahua, who was standing with Vikir, started to sweat profusely as he looked at the guest. As the guest looked at them, Chihuahua stood at attention and wondered if the guest was who he thought he was. On the other hand, Vikir looked calmly at this new guest. This new guest was none other than the head butler John Barrymore. The butler greeted Vikir with a smile, remarking on how it had been a long time since they had last seen each other. Vikir acknowledged his greeting, complimenting the butler on how much better he looked now. The butler approached Vikir, jokingly asking if he really thought so. He then remarked that he had believed Vikir would do well ever since he had left the main residence. Vikir replied modestly, saying that he had just been lucky. As General Secretary Chihuahua stood by, he observed the head butler John Barrymore with a sense of awe. He recognized him as the best head butler of the Barrymore family, who had been serving the notoriously scary Baskerville family for 4 generations. He couldn't believe he was in the presence of his role model. Vikir interrupted Chihuahua's thoughts as he asked head butler what had brought him all the way to their location. The head butler replied that the patriarch had praised Vikir's progress and had ordered him to return to the main residence, seeming very happy about it. Vikir couldn't believe that Hugo could be happy, and he imagined his smiling face in disbelief. The patriarch of the Baskerville clan, Hugo, was reading an article with the title "The Most Beloved Figure of the Underdog Citizens, Vikir." The article detailed how Vikir had won multiple awards, including being the most trusted among merchants, most loved among farmers, most respected among children and scholars, and the most targeted by assassins. Hugo then looked up at Vikir and commented that the Baskervilles were only known for using weapons and not their brains. However, with Vikir's actions, they could change that image. Hugo praised Vikir, telling him that he had done well. Vikir humbly bowed his head and placed his hand on his chest, saying that he had just done what he was supposed to do. However, he couldn't help but wonder if the face Hugo was making was supposed to be a happy face. Hugo declared that one must reward and punish according to the situation. He then announced that Vikir would be the one to attend the academy that year. Upon hearing this, Vikir remained calm and thought to himself that this was expected. He knew that the academy that he would attend was called Colosseo, which was considered the best academy in the empire. The academy catered to the children of aristocracy and royal families and required students to reside in the dormitories for internal security. Vikir saw this as an opportunity to grow stronger while avoiding Hugo's attention. As Hugo continued, he mentioned that he planned to send a few others with Vikir but had yet to choose whom. He then asked Vikir if he had any siblings whom he would like to attend with. Vikir replied that he was closest to Highborough, Middleborough, and Lowborough, all of whom he internally thought of as his potential sandbags. Hugo agreed with Vikir's decision and offered to send those three with him. Hugo then asked Vikir if he remembered the plan he had thought of when he was 8 years old. Vikir guessed that Hugo was referring to the plan they had come up with during the joint training with the Morgs. Vikir recalled that the plan was to lend the ruby mines to the Morg family and use them to get rid of the barbarians. With a smirk, Hugo confirmed that the plan had worked. Vikir asked him to clarify, to which Hugo explained that the Morgs had suggested a joint raid and they had been very humble about it. Hugo then suggested that Vikir should go on a territory inspection before entering the academy to check whether the laws he had altered were being upheld. He added that it would be a good experience for Vikir. Vikir bowed his head in agreement and said that he would follow Hugo's orders. Soon Vikir and Chihuahua walked out of the gates as Vikir got ready to depart. Chihuahua waved goodbye to Vikir with tears in his eyes. He addressed Vikir as deputy consul and promised to do his best with the administrative work in the meantime. Vikir turned back to look at Chihuahua and thought to himself that he would soon be parting ways with the Secretary General. As Vikir and his group traveled some distance from the city, Vikir suddenly called out, instructing someone to reveal themselves. Dozens of men dressed in black appeared from hiding places behind Vikir's group, including one who emerged right beside Vikir. Vikir apologized for making the man wait, explaining that he wanted the departure to be orderly. The man removed his head cover, revealing himself to be from the Pitbull Order, and his name was Vikir Baskerville. He assured Vikir that they would safely transport him to the Morg's juvenile fortress. Vikir asked about his uncle Bastontrier, and learned that he was doing well, but had become adamant about admitting Vikir into the Pitbull Order following the slave auction incident. However, Vikir internally admitted that his uncle made him feel uncomfortable. Vikir and Staffordshire arrived at an area with hills where they saw farmers working in the fields. Vikir asked if this was the region that they had lent to the Morgs, and observed that it didn't seem like anyone was breaking any laws. Staffordshire replied that the envoy team was supposedly sent for territory inspection, but Vikir knew that their real mission was to get rid of the barbarians. Staffordshire informed Vikir that the Morg family had formed a large group consisting of 3 delegates, 30 lower house parliament members, and about 100 mages who weren't legislative members. Vikir noted that the Morgs seemed to be taking the matter seriously. However, he thought to himself that the Baskervilles had only brought a dozen knights, and himself, a member of the lower house parliament, while the elites were on standby on the other side of the mountain range. He remembered Hugo's advice that it wouldn't be a bad idea to look into the barbarians' lifestyle. As Vikir and Staffordshire continued on their path, they soon spotted a fortress in the distance. Surrounding the fortress were many dead trees, and skeletons hung from their branches. Vikir explained to Staffordshire that a mage must have done this, and this must be a message to the barbarians from the Morgs. Staffordshire remarked that it was a scary warning, while Vikir found himself reminiscing about Camus Morg. He wondered how much she had grown since they last met. As they approached the fortress gate, 3 figures appeared above it, and a voice demanded to know who they were. Vikir and Staffordshire looked up in surprise and saw 3 identical girls standing there, one of whom declared that no one could pass without their permission, while the other 2 repeated her statement in unison. Vikir recognized the 3 girls and realized that they were the Morg's 3 flowers, the triplets Hysis, Middleseas, and Losis. Their reputation for insanity was well known, and their combined madness was said to reach the heavens. Vikir introduced himself as part of the envoy team from the Baskervilles, who had come to inspect the territory and improve friendly relations. He demanded that the fortress gates be opened for them. However, Hysis refused and said that she needed to report to the person in charge before they could enter. She suggested that they would get a response about tomorrow. Vikir questioned their right to stop him from entering his own land, but the triplets just smirked. Hysis reminded him about the tenant protection law, and mocked him for looking down on them because they were paying rent there. She continued to mock him, saying that the tenant protection law was made by his family. Vikir began to feel a headache and his hand started to glow with a red aura as he became increasingly annoyed by the persistent questions. However, he managed to control his anger and explained that he had made changes to the law to allow him to chase away tenants he didn't like. He reiterated his demand for the gates to be opened one final time, and a wave of killing intent and bloodlust emanated from Vikir, aimed directly at the morgue's 3 flowers, causing them to look upon Vikir with fear. Amidst this tension, Losis broke out in anger and cast a spell towards Vikir. She stated that she had heard that some psycho kid had taken charge of the underdog city, but they had dealt with enough of such individuals before and knew how to handle him.